Welcome to Lights Out. I'm John Weiss,
And I'm Andy Henderson.
and today we're going to talk about augmented reality, virtual reality, mixed reality, all that kind of stuff. I don't even really know what it means, Andy.
Yeah, and our guest today is Alex Kelly. John and I have both known Alex for a while, and he's been in the AR, VR space, augmented and virtual reality space for a few years. And without further ado, let's dive in.
Hey, Alex, thanks so much for joining us.
Hey, John. Hey, Andy. Nice to be with you guys. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, man, we're really excited to have you, and would love for you to take just a minute or two and tell folks a little bit about who you are and what makes you relevant in the AR, VR space.
Sounds good. Will do. So my career has been kind of the intersection of digital technology and manufacturing. Started my career in manufacturing on the plant floor and different operations and manufacturing engineering roles, and then moved into more software development and recently AR and VR in the wearable space, looking at industrial use cases and really driving innovation within that space.
Awesome. So right off the bat, Alex, when we talk about AR, VR, one of my pet peeves, if you will, I always see the two together with a slash in between them, AR/VR, and then whatever the rest of the title is of the article, right? Can you help level set a little bit and educate me and the audience? What's the difference between the two and what does it all mean?
Yeah, it's a great place to start, and it gets more challenging when you have other companies bringing in different terms as mixed reality, and that really gets confusing on kind of where that fits into the spectrum. So the way I look to look at it is, you think of augmented reality, it's really placing some kind of digital image over top of the real world. So it's an overlay content. You can still see your surroundings. You just have some digital information, whether that's a 3D model, whether that's just a 2D screen. It's placed on top of your physical environment. So we can get into a little bit later some of the use cases, what's great there, versus when you look at virtual reality. Now, virtual reality is you're completely immersed in another world. So these are where you see kind of the Oculus devices that go completely around your head and you're completely immersed. Those are great for other industrial applications. There's great use cases for both, but it's a very different setting. When you're in the VR, you have to be mindful. Usually you're sitting because it's very easy to walk into something physically because you can't see that as you're immersed fully in that VR headset. Then you have some other companies as they bring out new physical hardware that start looking at mixed reality, and that's kind of the blending the lines. I would say it's more towards the line of augmented reality. You can still see your virtual space, but instead of just overlaying content on whatever you look at, you can actually hide digital objects in the physical world. So think about if it's now more spatial computing. You can have an object behind a car. So if you're standing in front of the car, it's not just overlaid on top of the car. You have to physically walk around the car, and then a digital object would show up within that space.
So like Pokemon Go when you're hunting, is that?
That's a great use case. A lot of times people, when they haven't heard of AR, it's one of the things I use, either the Pokemon Go, and it's more that mixed reality use case. You're going and finding digital objects in the physical world. But the most simple use case of AR is football. If you look at everybody's watching football, those yellow lines obviously are not there on the field. That is everyday use case of AR that people are seeing but might not fully realize.
That's a good analogy. Really good.
I think one of our good friends, Mr. Paul Boris, a couple of weeks back referred to this also as hats on cats, as I think he said it with AR. So the filters, putting hats on cats on your iPhone, for example, or making your nose look like a cat nose. That's also probably a common use case that a lot of folks are familiar with seeing.
Absolutely. Snapchat and Instagram, have been really pushing that consumer side of the space with different filters and all kinds of different effects that you can have just using your phone camera.
Yeah. Mixed reality is pretty neat too. You mentioned that one, and that's not one that I often think of. You and I were at a machine builder's facility a number of years ago, and I remember it was the first time I had put one of these on myself personally. And I had, prior to this experience, I never touched any of these augmented reality or virtual reality things except Google Glass when it first came out, but it was terrible and I didn't use it much. But this thing was really neat. If you remember, Um,
Hmm.
I think it was the HoloLens, maybe. I don't know if that's
Correct.
okay.
Yep.
And
We're
so
using Hollands.
the experience there for anyone who hasn't used this, just to give an example of what mixed reality is really like. Also, um, I put the glasses on, and I was basically in a digital like room, right? It was all kind of black and just interesting, very futuristic feeling, but I could see my hands, right? And I could do gestures with my hands. So if I did something like this, where I pulled on a diagonal angle, it would actually create a shape virtually, and it interacted with my hands. So I could like smack it, and it would go flying across this digital space. So just very cool experience, um, just to help paint the picture. Yeah.
Absolutely, yeah. And you have, those use cases, and there's a whole spectrum of devices. We can jump into that for sure, because there's, great use cases for some versus others. But the HoloLens is a great example, more of that mixed reality. And I think it was Microsoft that kind of really pushed that term out into the industry. But where their device, you can do quite a bit with the hand tracking. As you mentioned, you can grab objects. So think about training use cases where you can grab things and move things around. And not only is that interacting with the digital world, but it can give you haptic feedback. If you pair some other devices with it, there's tons of use cases that, that type of interaction is awesome for.
I'd love to know, speaking of use cases, can you tell us? So I'm talking about making shapes and smacking them around. Okay, that's cool. But let's translate this to the real world, and especially the industrial world. What are people actually doing with this?
Yeah, so there's a lot of great use cases and really to me, the use cases kind of drive the dependency on the hardware. So when you look at use cases and things to consider when someone's going to implement AR or VR or mixed reality in their operations, you have the software side of things, you have the hardware side of things, and based off these use cases, it can really drive the dependency on what are the devices out there or software platforms out there that you can use. One of the most common use cases for virtual reality is training. So if you want to put someone in an environment and have them go through OSHA training or hazardous environment training without having that risk of doing it for the first time in that environment, virtual reality is great for that. They can be seated in the chair, go through their operations. A lot of times with virtual reality, it's paired with some kind of controller, so you can actually move your hands in different ways, and that will interact within that virtual environment. So I could actually reach up, turn a knob, and it would open a valve on a system. That's a great example for some of those use cases like hazardous material or hazardous environments that you don't want to turn the wrong knob and create a sparking explosion in the physical world. It's better to err on the side of caution, do it in the virtual world first until you're comfortable, then go out there and do that.
One of
That's
the
kind of
one of the things that we were in the past we've looked at using virtual for VR for is there are these large pieces of equipment that get built once every couple of years, if that, and so people tend to have to relearn how to do it every time it comes around. And so if you could do a virtual assembly process in the VR environment, and people could keep their skills current doing that, it can help whenever the real situation comes along as well. I like the hazardous environment one because there's a real safety piece to it. But there's also like the knowledge retention piece of that one. I don't know. Don't want to steal your thunder if that was coming, but
no, that's a great example there of something that's not routinely done. And if you're going to be doing on the assembly line, you're going to want to practice ahead of time to keep those skills up to date for sure. So I think training is one of the most common use cases for the virtual reality. As you kind of transition, it might be work instructions within the virtual space. You can look at some of the more basic head-mounted devices. So now we look at smart glasses, are usually the medium to bring these AR experiences to life in an industrial setting. You can do it on a phone or a tablet. Challenge there is usually you want to be hands-free when you're in an industrial setting. So if we look at the most basic glasses out there, smart glasses that can deliver this content, the first one that jumps to mind for a lot of people is work instructions. So now you've gone through that virtual training, you've seen the hazardous environment, what you need to do. but maybe you want to be reminded along the way. So now you can just have very basic cards of work instructions right up in an eyepiece that as you're going step by step, it can guide you through that process again to make sure you're doing it in a safe way or in the correct way. This is great for, you think of complex processes. If there is a wiring harness that you're wiring for different, let's say different car systems, there could be 1,000 different wiring harnesses you're going through, or you do the same one 99% of the time, but that one time there's a different one. This is great medium to bring that to the operator's attention, that once you get to the step that is different, instead of assuming it's the same as all the other, you can have a notification show up inside the glasses showing you, hey, this one harness is different because it's a custom order. Here's what you need to do differently, and deliver that to them in real time.
Could there also, I mean, there could also be some sort of feedback too, right? Because these devices typically have cameras on them, or they not typically, they almost always have to have cameras on them. And so like if you're monitoring, if the camera can see people's hands as they're putting it together, it could also do some sort of quality control, because a person might ignore the message that pops up on the screen. Is that, have you seen that? Do you think it's to come, or is it?
Absolutely. And actually, we were chatting a little bit before this, John and I, about kind of where is the future of all this going, and the spectrum of use cases. But I think some of that is really where things are going to go. The analytics behind all of that, the work instructions. Did someone have the eyepiece? Because a lot of them are on kind of a pivot system. Back where they mounted the glasses, you could have the eyepiece up. So when there was that notification, did the user actually bring down the eyepiece? Did the angle of that eyepiece change from the accelerometers in the device? Mm-hmm. Those are some very interesting, kind of futuristic thoughts of, you don't see that too much because a lot of the AR industry is newer on adopting this technology and the basic use cases. But you think about exactly what you just mentioned, whether that's using the camera to capture the instructions or to capture the environment and say, hey, you actually plugged the red wire into the blue wire because it did an image analysis and detected it was not the right connection. I think we've been talking about the smart glasses. Take that a step aside here. There's great use cases with external systems. To think about a TV and a vision system. And with COVID, I've actually seen some warehouse companies implementing systems that will use this same augmented reality. So think about that stripe for the football, but now they're putting circles around all the employees for their 6-foot distance to make sure they're keeping their social distancing throughout the warehouse. And it'll show a green circle if you're 6 feet. And if you start coming too close to another person, it'll show you that red circle indicating that there's TVs all around showing this, that you're getting too close to that person. So that's pretty much exactly what you're talking about with the camera. Interesting to see that implemented now here with the changing in the work environments with the current pandemic.
Mm-hmm. The one that you're describing, that's what I'm seeing a little bit more of, not necessarily just related to social distancing, but the transition from AR being just a lens that we view things through and becoming more of a projector type system, especially in industrial environments. And that's really unique. I don't know if a lot of people are aware of that, but I think when I picture the future of this, there's a demo that Stanley Black & Decker set up in Chicago that I was fortunate enough to play with. And I say play with because it was actually quite fun, but it's not a toy. It's a production. It's an assembly process. But it's very futuristic in the sense that it's an augmented reality experience, but it's all through projectors. So what it is you walk up to your assembly station, and there are a number of steps, and it's the assembly of a hand drill, an electric drill. And what it does is it quite literally illuminates the steps that you go through in this assembly process. So step one is pick up the drill strap or whatever, the handle, right? And if you don't pick it up, it won't advance to the next part. So there's a whole camera system that knows if you picked up the right thing, and you can't trick it. If you go next to it and pick up a screwdriver, it's not going to move on to the next step because it knows that the drill is still there. Then the next process, place the other component inside of the drill handle. And if you put it in there, but it's not in properly, it will not move on to the next step. And the whole time on the countertop, it's actually putting instructions that's telling you what to do step by step. Step one, do this. Step two, do this. Really fascinating experience.
And just to reiterate, it's all without, like, there's no equipment that people have to wear. It's all being projected into the environment.
That's right. You walk
really
up cool. And it's all projected overhead straight down onto the tabletop.
Yeah, there's a couple I can think of like that. There's a company out in Boston that's doing very similar, just operator workstations where they do a lot of that LiDAR systems where they're shining it directly down on top of the tabletop and showing you the work instructions. Then you can take that to a larger scale of, now you think about if a person's going to pick something in a warehouse, you could have a larger projector highlighting the exact bay that they need to go to and pick that item from. So yeah, there's great use cases that don't involve the head-mounted systems that a lot of people, when they hear AR, VR, it's always thinking of the devices and what's put on your head. There's a lot of use cases that you don't need that.
That's really cool. So
the heads-up display in a car is a great example for that. Shoots it up on the windshield and you can see your directions, your navigation, like it's projected out in front of you, but it's just on the windshield of your car.
That's really cool. So like, when we talk about those types of future scenarios, my mind always goes to, well, what types of conditions are conducive to it? Because I imagine it's got to be a perfect environment. Is that true? Do either of you guys know, like, could we actually go do that in a real factory today?
Why don't you go first, Jon?
That's the $1 million question for a lot of what we talk about.
Yeah.
My gosh. So the caveat with a lot of what we are describing is it all requires edge compute, right? You have to be able to process images and make decisions at the edge, which requires some kind of edge processing component, from at least in my experience. Whether it's an industrial gateway or something like that, there has to be something there that's powerful enough to make some decisions and provide some feedback, whether it's in the form of images or whether it's in the form of analytics that are being shown on a dashboard. Some of the stuff that we're talking about, I've personally seen it deployed in production in factories. So I think the answer is yes, Andy.
Well, I guess I was more so referring to the Stanley Black & Decker, like, example because to me, sorry, I digress for a moment. but to me, like, the physical devices that you have to put on your head, I've worn a few of them, and they can be okay, but lots of times they're cumbersome and kludgy, and there's a reason why Alex talked about flipping it out of the way and bringing it back down, is because lots of people don't want it in their face all the time. And so, like, being able to use the environment as the screen upon which things are projected, that's really interesting. And to me, it seems like, yeah, I get edge compute is important, but just lighting conditions, dirt and other crap being around on surfaces, like, I don't really know how big of an impact those things are, but I imagine they are a big impact. But I still, like, my engineering head says, those are just problems to figure out a solution for. They're not there's nothing stopping us today, nothing inherently putting roadblocks in front of us to keep us from doing any of it. Alex, is like, you got something to say?
I think there's a lot of challenges and barriers to adoption. You just have to be systematic about thinking and what are the conditions. If you don't have a good lighting in your warehouse, you might not be able to use a system that's trying to scan a barcode to know exactly which bin to shine the light on and tell someone to pick from there. But that's where a use case, maybe you do want to wear the head-mounted device because it has a flashlight on the front of it that when you walk up to the bins, it can illuminate all the signs and then be able to detect the QR codes. Just like, if you're in that hazardous environment that we went back to before, you really have to be thoughtful on which device you use, because there's only one device currently on the market that is suitable for that environment. It is the ATEX certified device that can be brought into that, and it's guaranteed not to create the spark. So really, and then you can even dive down deeper. You have to look at the software systems of what you have available. A lot of the marketing material out there for augmented reality, Jon, we talked about the one back in the industrial equipment that we were working with. That was great for showing people the capabilities. But if we look at that at a large scale production and deployment, how hard is it to grab all of those CAD models? We talked about the connectivity. That's always a challenge. You know, the devices, the head mounted devices are getting better with how much they can store locally. There's a lot of pushes with 5G to enable the transmission of those CAD files. So those CAD files are quite large. So it's great to have the one, but if you have, let's say 200 assets that you're storing, how are you going to transmit that across the edge up to the cloud where they're generally stored in the cloud? Do you have all those CAD models? If you want to see it broken down bolt by bolt, well, the animation there for the CAD, was it designed in a way where, you know, sometimes when I'm doing quick home projects and I throw something together in CAD, it's not designed the best way to actually be animated and broken down just because I'm doing something quick. So it's really looking at not only what's out there technology wise, what would be the conditions you're deploying it in to see, you know, is it a hazardous environment? Do you not have good lighting? But then also, what other systems do you need to support that? And that's why, you know, one of the great use cases I've seen, and we've talked a lot about on my previous company and deployment, is instead of having that CAD file to do all the animations, that's great for the first time. Maybe every single time I'm going to assemble to something, I just want a red overlay dot on the specific component that I'm supposed to be putting the screw on. Show me that. I don't need to see the animated screw come in and screw in because the latency is too much. Once I see it once, I don't need the fancy graphics. Just show me that red dot. So it's really taking a step back and asking yourself, what do you need out of this use case? And what are the components that would actually enable that?
I think when I think about the future of adoption for some of this stuff, I think of more controlled environments, to be honest with you. I think it's to your point, Andy, I think some of this stuff is a little bit difficult to control in busy, you know, I hate to say dirty, but, you know, dirty work environments where there's dust and chips coming off of processes and, you know, milling metals and all kinds of stuff, right? These places are messy. I mean, we've all been in there and we come out dirty, and that's part of what makes it so fun to go there. But when I think of video analytics and stuff like this, that's a real challenge, I think. Where I can see this being used earlier as the technology evolves and as use cases evolve. I think it's more controlled environments like in the CAD process. So Alex was just talking about building parts in modeling components in CAD. Well, what if I could get away from the CAD terminal and I could do an augmented reality process where I have an exploded view of my component right in front of my face, and I can actually move it around, right? And make parts bigger and smaller, and I can look at it as if it's right in front of me. Think about how immersive that is for a parts engineer that's building something versus having to look at it in a quasi 3D. I think we call it 3D on the screen, but let's be honest, once you've actually put these glasses on, there's nothing as 3D as that right now.
One of the earliest things that I saw, and it's probably been, I don't know, 14, 15 years ago now. It was a company that I was working for had a cave. They called it the cave, and you walk in and it was a bunch of projectors. It was a room that closes. There was a seat because they were making large industrial equipment that people operated. There was a seat that you sit in, and then it was just projectors putting like the different views on all the walls. And I do think you had to wear like special like 3D glasses like you'd wear in a theater or something. But you could look around, you could move, and you could see where all the different buttons and controls and what your visibility was like. And they could flip from one piece of equipment to another almost instantaneously. And it was for the purpose that I think you're talking about, right? And being able to ideate in quickly, being able to make a change to the model for something and then get instantaneous feedback from someone in a virtual environment. It's really cool stuff too.
So I would challenge just a bit in the sense that I think, and that's what tough thing with when people hear AR and a lot of the marketing material, they think it's always these 3D models. You know, there's a whole kind of a sidetrack using all this technology, using the smart glasses, the work instructions, and the platforms out there for these that aren't even AR use cases that would go across the spectrum of other work environments, that really dirty environment. John, let's say I'm under my car and I'm trying to change the oil and I've never done it on this specific vehicle. If I could wear one of those glasses and just have the video feed going and having an expert, I call up Andy. I know Andy's great with cars. I call him up, and as I'm going to pull one line or change, take off a bolt, and he's like, hey, he's watching my video. Hey, that's not the right one. I think you need to do this other bolt, and guide me through the steps of process there. That one, great use case for just a head mounted device. You don't even need any overlays in the world, just Andy, me transmitting my video back to him and him guiding me through the instructions.
I guess that's where I struggle though, Alex. So this is, and not to be overly ornery, right? But this is where I feel like the buzzword of AR kicks in, and then you're just talking about FaceTime. We could FaceTime right now if we want to, and I'll tell you where your oil plug is.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, but
so maybe help educate me, right, and some of the viewers. So where is that threshold where it's no longer a screen sharing session? Where does it really become what maybe technologists would consider, okay, that's some AR right there?
So here's a good example for that is, and part of the challenge, so I completely understand your point, part of the challenge is some of the technology enables all of those use cases, and then when someone hears that, like that video feed, they just group it into, oh, that's smart glasses, that's AR, even though technically that one might not be. But you think about use cases, a company that makes an application called Chalk. You can go download it on your iPhone, your iPad, and what it is, it's basically FaceTime. So I can do the FaceTime, and they have a great video that someone needs that remote expert help. This is in the smart glasses and AR world. That's one of the big use cases, that remote help. So need the remote help. How can I show my 90-year-old grandmother how to use a new coffee maker that she just got? So she holds it up, and I'm doing the FaceTime, and I'm showing her, and I'm saying, so again, with that FaceTime view, push that button right there on my coffee maker that I can see. She pushes the button. No, not that one, the one next to it. Push the different button. No, the one below it. So it's hard in that sense to get exactly dialed in. So now you bring the AR into it. While I'm doing that FaceTime, what if I could then say, hold on a second, I draw on my screen, that now transmits to her screen and circles exactly which button I was talking about. So now you just went from that video use case, using the same technology, using the same software, same hardware. Now we just transcribed into the AR world. And I showed her by drawing and transmitting my circled image to her device. And so back to the video use case, there's a lot of the software platforms out there that allow some of that can show that AR instructions. If I truly don't know what button it is, and I tried ringing Andy, couldn't get a hold of him, I now pull up the digital work instructions, and they have the capability to do that AR overlay.
Makes sense.
So it's challenging, and I think with the industry, you hear a lot about, once you hear smart glasses and HoloLens, it always jumps to AR use cases, even if some of them are just as simple as a FaceTime.
Right. I like the movie Minority Report, Alex. Like when I think of AR and VR, I want to be like, I want to walk into my office and swipe screens all over the place and figure out what's on my calendar for today. And, that's why I'm breaking your chops a little bit, but.
And that's a good one. And Kingsman is another one that as soon as I saw those come out with those, they have the small little glasses. Yeah. That's a great example of more of the futuristic Google Glass, right? You could have the little regular pair of glasses and have all of your information right in front of your face.
It's pretty neat stuff. One, just to change gears a little bit, one thing that I've seen coming out of the pandemic this year is more and more people doing things remotely, right? And that's something Andy and I talk about a lot, but specific to AR, VR, to this world, I've seen a couple really cool videos on LinkedIn coming out of some Asian countries and Asian industrial companies where they have employees that are quite literally at home in their living room controlling big pieces of equipment like drilling machines, excavators, things like this. And they're doing it with, you know, I don't know what type of device it is, but it's some kind of augmented reality device where they're essentially in a 3D view of what you would see in the driver's seat of that piece of equipment. And I don't know, is this real? Is this stuff happening? It's just stuff that I've seen on LinkedIn, but I want your professional expertise here. Are we living in the future?
I mean, I don't know about the excavators. My concern there would just be if you're operating heavy equipment and you're not physically there. But you think about a drone pilot, think about a lot of this. I don't know a lot what the government's doing with drones, but you hear a lot of those drone pilots. And even look in the consumer side, a lot of people are putting these FPV drones, these little racing drones. You put a full VR headset on, and now as you're flying the drone around, you're seeing the exact view from the cockpit of the drone. That's almost exactly what you're talking about, but with drones versus heavy equipment. So again, I'm sure it's possible, and it's always a fun engineering problem. You think about that one, if you want to be in the cockpit, and even if you just have the camera is being transmitted back to the device. So the example of an excavator, if you wanted to do that, you just have some cameras mounted to the side of the excavator. So as you're moving the excavator, you can see what's going on. But again, my first reaction is, what is the safety side of that? What is the practical application of that if something goes wrong, if you lose your internet? You know, same thing with the drones. You see a lot of times that people are losing transmission to the drone, and drones sent off into who knows where.
Losing the connection is important too, but like, to me, the latency of it it's got to be a huge challenge. Just in some cases, microseconds can be a big deal, right? And so I guess that's where the 5G conversation comes in too, right? Because I remember
Absolutely.
Completely off topic, I apologize, but I forget who the company, maybe it was Verizon, showed the video of the receiver, the football receiver wearing glasses, showing the video of somebody throwing the ball at him and he catches it, right? That's and they're using that to talk about how low the latency is with 5G. So maybe that is a technology that enables this use case, and you can overcome it. The other piece of it is, like, I've driven some of those pieces of equipment, and you rely a lot upon feedback in the seat, feedback of the controls, feedback in the sounds, and so, like, being able to do that haptic. The haptic feedback, so you get that feel of what's going on around you, I think is another challenge. But I have seen research. It was a university, I think it was in Japan, where they were working with somebody else around the world, where there was a glove, and there was a person wearing the glove, and there was another person with the transmitter who was holding a Lego, and the person wearing the glove could feel the little what do you call the things on the top of the Lego,
little bumps,
the extrusion.
The person wearing the other glove on the other end could feel those.
Wow.
And they've worked out that type of sensory feedback. That was really cool.
Yeah, that's, I think, one of the more fascinating things of problem topic of emerging technology is there's a lot of cool technology out there, and you can think of this random use case. How would we do this? You know, there's full body suits that I've seen at IoT conferences that someone could put a full body suit on and have all of that haptic feedback. So the use cases are really kind of the challenge and where to think about before, because you can always, the world we live in, you can always find technology to kind of enable the use case. It's just whether or not that is practical, whether or not that is scalable and deployable is really where the challenge becomes, and safety and everything else.
So all the stuff that we're talking about, I guess I think we're just about out of time, but as we wrap, Alex, we're talking about a lot of pretty cool futuristic things. What do you see the future holding for this type of technology? Is the machine operator of tomorrow, or the excavator driver of tomorrow, whatever the role might be, are these people going to be sitting at home or sitting in a control center with a helmet on, like they're flying an X-wing in Star Wars? I mean, help me understand, what's the future look like for these folks?
I think It's a tough question because one, you got to be careful you don't get too much into the future, because then a lot of people focus on that and will wait. Hey, I'll wait till that's available before I get started, because there's a lot of great applications that I do want to kind of list them quick before we do end, because there's a lot of great applications to get started now. Looking in the future, I think the 5G is definitely going to enable a lot of applications. You're going to start looking at delivering some more of that truly immersive content, the 3D content, down to the devices. I think a lot of it right now is being truthfully held up on the hardware side of things. You know, the wearability of them, the battery life. You're trying to put all this technology into such small devices that can go on your head. So if you look at some of the larger ones like a HoloLens, the battery life isn't a full shift for an operator. But once we can get the battery life there and get the immersive technology in and make it really seamless, I think the future and where it's got to really focus on is that seamless integration to your daily life. You go watch that Kingsman movie and you see how they just sit down in a conference room and 10 people fill into this virtual conference room just through their normal pair of glasses. You know, that seamless integration is where it's truly going to be key and needed for the adoption. Yeah, I could definitely see, especially look now with all the remote work, how can we enable someone to do the job remotely and through some of that technology? And that's where, you know, some of the practical use cases right now, you have someone that might be older and have that 30, 40 years of experience in manufacturing, needs to help someone younger, but afraid to go into the workplace right now with COVID, give them some of that video technology and help guide them. I've heard from, you know, a manufacturer in Rhode Island that I've worked with many years now talk about that as COVID hit, he was using the smart glasses to help some of his employees that needed to stay home, train the younger people that could go into the factory. Yeah, I think that the future of where it's going to go, you look how seamless the Pokemon Go became into people's life now, the Snapchat, Instagram filters. Consumer world always really drives the technology, and it's then brought back into more of the industrial side. So I think it's going to get to the point where you can walk up to a machine. It's going to, whether it's using the video feed, whether it's using GPS or some kind of location data to know what machine you're at, it's going to automatically bring up the work instructions versus me needing to go through a menu and find the work instructions. It's just going to be that seamless integration. I can walk up, see it, say, hey, I need help, call John. And all of a sudden it's going to fire up a video call with John. It's going to switch back over to that AR overlay. Just that full integration is just going to be like we never even knew what it was like before you had all that technology.
I would say for a more efficient future, I would automate the process to call Andy, not John, if you really want help.
I don't know. We might digress then. Get off on some side topics.
That's good stuff, Alex. Well, hey, I think we're out of time. Really appreciate you taking the time to join us today. I think this was a great session. So to all of our listeners and viewers, as always, like and subscribe, leave us a comment. We'd love to hear from you. How are you using VR and AR? Are you using it? Are you not? Are you skeptical? Let us know. Until next time, we'll see you. Thanks.
Thanks, guys.